Hello and welcome to this week's edition of On Target Outdoor Ministries Field Tips. Well, this week we want to start out with a little story. When I was 13, my dad decided that he wanted to plant a few tomato plants. And for my dad, a few usually equated to a lot. And in this circumstance or this situation, he wanted to plant 100 tomato plants that spring. I'm just gonna go ahead and say this. My dad he's a little frugal, if you know what I mean, and there was no way with all these tomato plants that he was going to go out and buy store-bought tomato stakes. You know, the kind that you tie the plant up with. So my job that spring was to go out into the woods and chop down 100 small trees that we could use as tomato stakes. Well, I knew this was going to be a tough job, but I knew that it probably would have some fringe benefits if I did a good job. So the next morning, I jumped right out of bed and went straight to work. Although I was a teenager and the brain hadn't quite fully formed yet, you parents, you know what I mean. I wanted to make sure I did a great job, so as I went down into the woods, I looked for just the perfect patch of trees that I could use. And my father told me they all needed to be about 5 feet tall, about 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and every one needed to be just as straight as an arrow. So I wandered around and I looked for probably an hour. I wandered around and I looked, where was this perfect patch of trees? And I came up to this fence line on the property that really I was unfamiliar with, but I looked on the other side and wouldn't you know, there was Beulah land. This perfect patch of trees, every one of them were 5 feet tall, 2 or 3 inches in diameter, and every one was just straight as an arrow. I met my dad whenever he got home from work, right at the door, and I told him I'd found this perfect patch of tomato stakes. And in fact, I had 150 tomato stakes ready to go. And he smiled at me with this big smile, and he gave me this kind of approval that only a dad can give a son, and he said, "Wow, good job, son. I thought this would take you a couple of weeks." So I said, "Let's go out and see what you got." So we walked out to where I had all these perfect tomato stakes stacked up, and I was watching his face to see this great reaction that I was going to get. And this big smile that he had quickly started to fade away. He asked me, "Son," he said, "where did you get these tomato stakes, these trees?" And I told him, "Well, I wandered around and I walked up to this place in the property and I explained exactly where it was at." And by now the smile had gone completely away. And he informed me where I was at was not our property at all, and I had just annihilated a new stand of pine trees that our neighbor had planted just a few years back. Can I tell you this? The approval I was looking for didn't quite happen that day. So you might ask, what's the moral of the story? And it's simple, it's this. As a 13-year-old boy, I was trying to work very hard to gain my father's approval. And in this circumstance, it didn't work out. As adults, we often try to work very hard to gain our Heavenly Father's approval. But sometimes our motives and our thought processes are all kind of messed up. In the book of Ephesians, the Apostle Paul explains it to us. He puts it like this, he says, "For grace you have been saved through faith, and not of yourselves. It's a gift from God, not as a result of works, so that no one may boast." The Apostle Paul was explaining you can't work your way into heaven. As adults, we go out and we try to do a lot of good things, and we try to impress other people, and we try to make a good name for ourselves, but a lot of times our efforts are skewed. We're working for the wrong reason. You can't work your way into heaven. Your works should be a result of your faith and your relationship with Jesus Christ. Folks, it's this simple. Salvation is a result of God's perfect grace and our faith that He sent His Son to die on the cross for you. And it's only through a relationship with Him that we can be saved. You can't work your way into heaven, but I'll be honest with you, it takes a lot of work to keep and maintain trophy animals on your property. Let's be honest, deer are going to go wherever the food is at. They're just like me. I'm going to do the same thing. And in the springtime, there are a lot of choices for deer to use, but also deer are edge animals and they will always transition using edges. What I mean by that is the edge of a clear cut or the edge of a big patch of timber. After you locate those edges, one thing that you can do is run a brush hog or a disc over those edges, and what that's going to do is knock down that old tough stuff and generate new growth, and it will help you keep those animals using and transitioning through those same areas throughout the spring and summer. Well folks, that's been your field tip for this week. As always, we want to thank you for spending time with us. We'll see you next time, and God bless.